Well, I started with $4,000 in 2014. And so this whole thing was just snowballed off of profits from 2 apartments that I furnished for $4,000 total.
And then you haven't stopped ever since.
We grew from 10 doors 2017 to 103 by New Year's Day 2020.
Maybe go through some of the common misconceptions about what you do.
The main misconception is like the whole grab at passive income. It's the real estate thing. We're utilizing real estate. So having access to assets is cool and all, but where we make our money is all business practices, all business processes.
Any little hacks on names too?
Airbnb does not allow you to choose king bed. But if you write king bed as the first 2 words of your title, now as people are searching, they go, oh, this one's got a king bed, click.
All right, welcome everybody. This is Peter Voogd, and I'm excited for this call. Thank you for tuning into our monthly Millionaire video series where we interview the world's most elite and successful entrepreneurs, CEOs, and experts and game changers, people that aren't just making a difference in their industry, but really in the world. And these are people that I personally have massive respect for because of what they've built, what they've created, their experience, their unique ability to teach a certain subject they've mastered. And for this call, I'm excited because of the relevance and because of the value it's going to add to you guys, not just the importance of the topic, but because of the current landscape of society and what's happening. There's been so many questions coming up about Airbnb, about real estate, the market. Will it last? Can you make money? Is it sustainable? Sublease, arbitrage? Is it better than rentals? Like all kinds of stuff. I'm excited to have one of the best in the game, Rakidzich, who's done over 10 million on the platform, millions off the platform. He has 150 plus doors. They just added 55 more doors. They're adding 20 in Austin, 20 in Waco, Texas. They're doing some cool stuff in Dallas. He's moving quick. And he has 10, 15 million YouTube views, 220,000 subscribers, a lot of influence in the Airbnb game. And what stood out to me about Sean personally and why I had to get him on to talk and teach you guys was his focus on building the business the right way, sustainably, but also maintaining an exceptional lifestyle, traveling. He's getting into photography. He takes amazing pictures. He's maximizing life. What he's built is extraordinary. And what he's done is helped people duplicate what he's doing. And he's became an exceptional teacher in the process. So I'm super honored to have you, man. We're going to do mainly Q&A. People have a lot of questions, but thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day to be with us. Appreciate you.
Yeah, I would be lying if I said I was actually that busy. So thanks.
I was actually going to say, are you really that busy with all your automation? Maybe not.
Yeah. So it's good to be on here. Give me something to do. I appreciate it.
I'm excited, man. So I want to start because I'm curious. I've heard bits and pieces, but I want to go back to what sparked you to get into the Airbnb game, the real estate game. Was it by accident? Did you know it was going to be huge right away? Talk about kind of from the beginning how you got into it. I'm curious.
Yeah. So Airbnb, when I got into short-term rentals, was my 3rd business at the time. I was really just heavily into media consulting. I worked with newspapers. So I was in Houston working with Houston Chronicle, trying to find a way to get their brand changed so that millennials would read the newspaper. And I was building sales teams. So I was grabbing apartments under lease to relocate salespeople. So that way they wouldn't have to worry about anything. They just moved to town and start selling. And at one point I had a bunch of my employees relocate to new cities. And I just had in one high rise, I had 3 apartments that were empty. And of course I was going to pay the lease on these things. So I was like, I need to find a way to clear this inventory. And right at the time, Airbnb was getting popular. A friend mentioned it. So this was like November 2014. I put those on Airbnb and they started making a profit. And so the nature of me signing leases, furnishing them and putting them on Airbnb was really by accident because I just ended up holding inventory due to another business.
So accident. And then you saw, when was it that like a tipping point, that click where you're like, oh my gosh, I have a unique angle. I have an unfair advantage. I can do something most people can't. When was that moment when you realized you could take it huge?
Yeah. Do you remember the Super Bowl where the Ravens were up first quarter, like 21-0 against the Pats, 2017?
Yes.
It was that year. So Houston was hosting the Super Bowl. And as soon as I realized that Houston had the Super Bowl, everybody's talking about how people are going to rent the places out for thousands a night. And I still only had a few apartments. That was 2016 and I started 2014, but I was still working on my other companies. When I realized there's gonna be so much margin for a single night, I picked up 6 more apartments. So I had 10 apartments by the time the Super Bowl hit. And that's when I decided I'm going to grow this thing, was 2017.
And then you haven't stopped ever since. I love it.
Yeah, until COVID, basically. We grew from 10 doors 2017 to 103 by New Year's Day 2020. We went from 10 to 103.
Well, I want to talk about the journey, but I also want to start with common misconceptions. So people see you, they see your millions of views. They see, obviously, you're building a real business. There's a lot of misconceptions out there, a lot of fluff. Can you maybe go through some of the myths that you had to break and some of the common misconceptions about what you do, whether it's not owning a lot of property physically, but still making millions, whether it's short-term versus actual Airbnb arbitrage? Can you talk about just some of the misconceptions before we start?
Yeah, most of the misconceptions come from people who come directly from real estate. That's typically where it comes from. I came from a completely different space as a business owner. The main misconception is that, like, the whole grab at passive income, it's the real estate thing. The fact that we're using real estate, we're using apartments or houses, is what makes it easy to believe this, but it's an active business. It's hospitality. There's people who are checking in and checking out on a daily basis, which does not happen in regular real estate. There's customers that give you just the hardest time in the world sometimes, right? Because people are traveling. There's an element of marketing. There's a lot of operations. There's turnovers, housekeeping. There's just a lot of business pieces that are moving. We're utilizing real estate. So having access to assets is cool and all, but where we make our money is all business practices, all business processes. And I think that's the biggest misnomer in the space. People think it's a real estate thing. It's really not.
So let's explain the different ways you can make money in Airbnb. Let's kind of distill some of the different ways people have heard. They've heard sublease, arbitrage, they've heard rentals, they've heard luxury. Can you let's talk about some of the ones that are common, and let's talk about some of your favorites. Then we'll kind of dive into some things that I want to talk about.
So they all exist under one same kind of like nucleus, which is that what we're taking a piece of real estate and we're making it a short-term rental product. And that can look like a lot of different things, right? Whether you have a house, whether you have an apartment, whether you're a professional management company utilizing other people's assets, there's a lot of different flavors of ice cream in this. But what we're doing is we're furnishing a property. And then because the property is furnished, it's got its own utilities paid for. You can just show up with luggage and live there. We're lowering the barrier to entry for somebody to stay in a place. They don't have to sign a lease. They don't need to do a credit check. They can just move in. They can move in for a night. They can move in for a month. I mean, I've had a person move in for 14 months in an Airbnb and pay me a lot of money for 14 months, just like a regular lease, but they didn't have to sign a lease, so they paid me more money. So what we're doing is we're denaturing a real estate product and we're turning it into a hospitality product. And that is the core of what we do in Airbnb, whether or not it's arbitrage, whether or not you own the property, that's it. Now, a lot of people in the traditional real estate space, they already own a house. They already own a multifamily maybe. So what they'll do is they'll take something they own, they furnish it, they stop taking normal tenants, and then they start marketing it as a short-term product. And then there's an active management to generate more cash flow. People like me, my favorite thing is to find a landlord who maybe is building new high-rise, right? Brand new build high-rise. And I'll tell that landlord, we'll take 2 or 3 floors of your building, right as soon as it's ready. You get your certificate of occupancy, we'll take 3 floors. That jams cash into their business way faster than they ever anticipated. So then I get access and control of maybe 40 apartments, right? Maybe 40 doors I get access and control to, but I didn't have to buy them. So my cost to get started is the cost of the furniture, and that's it. I didn't have to put a down payment on the property, nothing. And a lot of cases with that kind of deal, because of the way it gets worked out, we'll get 2 or 3 months of free rent. So we actually literally just buy the furniture, get started, and we write the landlord our first rent check a few months later.
So that's probably one of your favorite ways to build, is that because there's no upfront money, you don't need a credit check and all that, correct?
Absolutely. Well, I started with $4,000 in 2014, by the way. And so this whole thing was just snowballed off of profits from 2 apartments that I furnished for $4,000 total. So yeah.
So there's so many different angles we can take: building a real business, like hiring people, maximizing your actual units on Airbnb. But I want to start with the current market, the current landscape. We have a lot of people that are in fear, like when the economy's down, when there's a recession, no one spends money. What's going to happen to the Airbnb market? And they kind of lump everything into the Airbnb market when they don't realize certain systems in the Airbnb market are better when the recession's down. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about your thoughts on the current market and the importance of arbitrage in this actual market, and how we can turn it into a real advantage that most people aren't thinking about.
Sure. So there's supply and there's demand. And I think a lot of people are afraid that their supply won't sell. That's the fear of a recession, right? And I call that metric absorption. when you have, say, 1,000 houses and 800 of them get booked, that's 80% absorption of supply. Now, there is going to be a different rate at which people like book an entire home for 1,000 a night versus the rate at which people book a studio apartment for 150 a night, right? Lower priced properties can compete on price better than these more expensive ones that have inflated operational structures. So what I'm seeing is that as people are trying to be more price responsible as they travel, because people still want to travel and they still need to travel, right? And they still don't want hotels. And this is another thing too, is as people travel for weeks of time, if they're stuck in a hotel, they can't do their own cooking. They don't have a kitchen. So now to stay in an Airbnb for a couple of weeks allows you to make your own meals and all that kind of stuff. And that actually lowers your costs. You get free parking every day instead of paying $35 for parking at some hotel, stuff like that. So Airbnbs are still more price competitive for people who are staying multiple days at a time in the city. And so we're good there, but people are not spending money on the flashy luxury stuff as much in a recession because they realize they don't need all those extras. They really just need a place that they can call home and feel comfortable. So arbitrage is great for this because with arbitrage, the nature of the business model is to pick up 30, 40, 50 doors at a time. And when you have that many doors, you start to create operational efficiency, much like a hotel would have. So where somebody with a 5-bedroom house, they'll hire a third-party company to do housekeeping or even full management, which can eat 25% of their revenue under management, or their housekeeping fees like $300 per night or $300 per cleaning because they're using a third party. When you have 50 or so apartments, that's pretty cheap to get into 50 apartments, you can start hiring real employees. You pay somebody by the hour to do your housekeeping. And now instead of $70 per housekeeping, your housekeeping costs maybe $25 per housekeeping. And that type of price competitiveness takes the persons who have scale and they still get bookings because they're more price efficient and they can be more price competitive and maintain profitability. And all the people who've been kicking tires and picking up 1 or 2 properties or don't understand the dynamics of business and the market forces, they start to go out of business because they cannot maintain profitability because all their costs are inflated. So arbitrage is, even as a mix, if somebody owns 10 properties, if they got into 30 or 40 doors arbitrage, they could start to have systems and start to become competitive on these processes. But that's where arbitrage really helps in the short-term rental space, is you can start to hire real employees and buy down your operating costs. And that's why it's a great time for arbitrage, is because, well, not only that, but we have to get into the deal flow side. Right now with arbitrage, landlords are willing to do deals because landlords are concerned about their future occupancy 6 months from now. So what we have right now is we've got 100 doors that we're taking online, and we're not taking a single deal of these 100 doors unless they give us exactly what we want, which is 8 weeks of rent for free, other concessions, maybe even below market rent, and some safety net stuff inside of our leases. If they deliver us a property that's not in proper condition, we get possession, but still don't pay rent until they get the property to the condition we asked for it. So we have a lot of negotiating power with landlords because they just want us to sign 20 leases, and they'll say anything to get us to sign 20 doors right now.
So in terms of marketing, not marketing, but negotiating, not a lot of confidence, and there's a lot of uncertainty right now. This is the best time to negotiate. So we talked earlier and you said this is actually a better time to go in and build a business, to do an arbitrage business, because a lot of people they thought they had a lot of leverage as landowner, as the actual owners. Now they don't, because they're a little more fearful. Talk about how this is a better time to negotiate because of that.
So 4 months ago, we couldn't get landlords to call us back nearly as quickly. We had a lot of lines in the water. But 4 months ago, as real estate prices were chipping up and chipping up, people started moving into rentals because they couldn't afford to buy a house as planned. And so they started to do that. So occupancy in the rental market started to inflate. But now that interest rates are going up, housing prices are pulling back. All of these new builds are starting to go stale. There's even multifamily new builds that are starting to go stale. There is now more fear or uncertainty on behalf of the owner, right? And as I'm sure a lot of your students even know this, if you get a loan to build a multifamily, your loan has some contingents in that deal, right? You have to hit a certain level of occupancy. You have to maintain a certain level of revenues or cash flows. The bank can pull your building from you if you completely fall on your face. That's how collateralized loans work. So now we've got these new build high rises, mid rises in Dallas or other cities coming into play. And if they don't think that they can get full on time, they will gladly do a deal with us to get there. They're like, we don't have anybody in the building yet. Our CO is going to come in about a month or 2 months. And we don't think that in 2 months, once we have our certificate of occupancy, that we can fill the building up. They'll do a deal with us to get 25% full right out the gate, because it might be their best shot at keeping the bank happy. So there's even more dynamics at play too, but it's really a sentiment thing. And when a landlord is not confident that their building's going to get full, our pitch as a partner, right, as a way to prevent them from having a bad situation with the property, then they're open-minded to what we have to offer, because we're solving a big problem, which is a cash problem.
And even back in 08, Sean, when the market crashed then and now, when I study and really, really dig deep into how people are making wealth and creating fortune and building their business, if you remove fear and look at the actual landscape, it's almost a better time to start building into understanding and learning this game versus 6 months ago when everyone was happy and a lot of people had fake confidence because of all the money that was in the system and everyone was crushing it. Real estate was 30% higher than most. Now I think is almost a better time. So it's good to have this call, because a lot of people watch the news, they see so much fear, like, oh my gosh, the economy, hold tight. But really, if you learn the game, this is a time to go all in.
Yeah, well, you can tell when the market's getting too easy, because last year, all of a sudden, everybody was a guru, right? Yeah. Just YouTube blew up with people who were they knew what they were doing. Just everybody showed up on YouTube, like, I'm going to teach you how to get rich. Like, it happened in the crypto space too. Remember when crypto was booming, everybody was a guru. So now that things are shaking loose, there's people who over leveraged, bid off more than they can chew, realize they don't know nearly anything about anything, and there's a lot of shakeout. And when that shakeout happens, and people start to give back properties, they start to shut down their businesses because they got in when it was too easy, there's a lot of opportunities for us to come in and say, hey, Mr. Landlord, I'm sorry that all of your tenants are leaving you. I'm going to fix that for you and pick up your properties. And there's a lot of cool dynamic there, because now is a time where, based on over the next year, there's going to be so many opportunities to buy things for pennies on the dollar in the space and in the real estate space all over the place. There's going to be cool deals. And it's buying from somebody who's forced to sell. That's the best deal you'll ever get, right? That's like, if I could just wait forever until people are forced to sell, like foreclosures and stuff like that, that would be the coolest move. So in the short-term rental space, not just arbitrage, as there's a purging of people who are not price effective and just got in at the peak and don't know how to run businesses, there's going to be a washout of inexperienced Airbnb operators. What that will cause a deflation of supply, which will then drive average nightly rate up again. And people will start making more money again on Airbnb because there's going to be less supply because people quit. Like in Houston, 6 months ago, people started quitting. So we're now actively picking up doors in Houston because everybody started quitting. So now that they're quitting, we're jumping in big time and taking advantage of the vacuum that's being created.
And I want you guys to have an unfair advantage. So we are going to get into tactics, but mentality has to be first. And I can feel that when I was newer too, if someone would say, just pick up 40 doors this way, they get a little overwhelmed. So let's kind of simplify to some of the first steps. You have a lot of tactics, but if someone wanted to start a business or pick up 40 doors, what are the tactical steps they have to think about in terms of the most important things to understand? Like if they wanted to start fresh.
Tactical steps to getting started instead of conceptual stuff. You're like do this, then this, then this is kind of stuff you're talking about.
I want them to get the right mentality. If you say pick up 40 doors, this is the best time to arbitrage. Instantly, a lot of people get overwhelmed because it's new language and they're like, wait, I want to do that. I have the time and the ambition and I have money, but I got to figure out how. Is it like the scripts? Is it understanding the back end? Is it like, what are some of the simplified steps?
Well, first it's a sale, right? Getting a landlord to do something they don't do. That's an influence thing. So what I teach my students is I'm like, find a building that hasn't even made a decision on this. There's going to be buildings that we don't allow short-term rentals, we don't allow corporate housing or whatever, but there's going to be buildings that haven't even considered it yet. And those are the ones that we really are good at. I've got it for the little guys. A lot of my students don't have much money, right? So they're trying to pick up one apartment or two doors, right? They're playing with $5,000 or $10,000 max at a time. And so I have a script for them to go in the front door and talk to the leasing staff and try to work their way up the ladder through the front door. With bigger people who can deploy, say, $100,000 more into deals, we go top down. We tend to hit somebody on the district level, somebody who's part of the syndicate or developer, and there's scripts to hit the top down. And when you're pitching multifamily, it's a math equation. When you're pitching a single family home, which is still a valid idea, even for people with tons of money, you can pitch 10 single family homes and do that. With pitching single family homeowners, it's more of an emotional decision because landlords have more ego, small landlords have more egos with their home. So pitching single family homes, it's still a sale, but it's an emotional sale. Pitching multifamily, it's a sale, it's an influence thing because you're trying to develop trust and get them to trust you on this deal, but it's based on the math. right? It's based on that risk return. If you work with me, 10, 20, 30 doors solves your future problems. Now you just have to trust me to do something you didn't think you were going to do with your property. So there's scripts there. There's knowing the product, right? The product is your tenancy. You're the product. So knowing the value of the product that you offer in a multifamily deal allows you to show up to a multifamily guy and say, hey, here's what I want to do. Here's how this is going to save you money, prevent you loss, stabilize your inventory, whatever. And this is what I want in return. And by doing that, you can then convince them to take on a 2-year-long lease or a 3-year-long lease instead of a singular lease, right? That gives you control for 3 years instead of control for 1. But then having a 3-year-long lease also makes it easy to tell them you want 2 months of free rent, because 2 months of free rent on a 3-year-long lease is a lot easier to digest than a 2 months of free rent on a 1-year lease. So that knowing the product, knowing what you're offering, knowing how it fits into their long arc for the building allows you to pretty much ask for everything that you want, but make it sound like it's for them. It's a really fun game. It's a fun game.
Love it. So I'm gonna go to some of the questions that some of our inner circle has. I'm gonna start with yours, Glenn. If you want to ask it, you can, or I have it right here. But he says, and he can do any follow-up questions, with the recession looming and fears of people cutting their spending, do you see demand for Airbnb properties going down or up, and why? And what are the biggest pros and cons of Airbnb over renting, leasing, in your opinion? And then we'll go over one more that he has.
Okay, yeah, 2-part answer. Pros and cons of Airbnb, short-term rentals versus long-term rentals. Let's start with that. Long-term rentals are more passive. They're easy to become passive, and you're just defined by the rental market typically, right? You get this slow fluctuation of rental rates. We all know what that is. You also have to deal with evictions if your properties are cheap enough, right? That's the thing. With short-term rentals, it's much more active. You have to have a housekeeping team. You have to have customer service. You have to do pricing strategy, which is super nerdy stuff, but you should be raising your rates for events and lowering your rates in slow season, right? Pricing strategy. There's going to be aspects of running the business. So somebody has to be open-minded and willing to put in work, or has enough money to get a big enough portfolio that they can hire the people to put in the work too, right? There's an element there. So it's much more active. It requires staying competitive and staying open-minded. But the pros are, you just generate so much more cash than a long-term rental. It's insane. Imagine if you had a multifamily that you owned where instead of collecting $1,500 a month in rent, you were collecting $3,500 a month in Airbnb fees, right? How would that affect the cap rate for that property? It would be insane, right? So the pros are obvious. The cons are you have to put in some work, and there's a learning curve. That's that. Now, the recession is causing a couple cool things to happen. It's really fun. And of course, no one has a crystal ball. So let me give you my best guess. Based on what we're seeing, people who own homes and bid off more than they can chew, they're putting up private rooms now, right? They're putting the 4th room of their house up. So there's a lot of cheap inventory that nobody wants, right? Because people are like, I need to pay my mortgage. Let me put a room up. And those rooms will go for $40 to $60 a night. And there are some people that will book that stuff because they're cool with staying with the family. There's a space for Airbnb there. That's the supply that's going up. The supply that's coming off the market are people who are afraid that the rental market's going to pull back even further. So people are selling their homes. They're trying to sell their homes at the top, and they're pulling their Airbnb listings off the market. So these entire homes are leaving because people are trying to cash out off that wave. What Dallas went up like 31% last year, so people are moving their properties off the market. There's going to be less demand for more expensive properties, I imagine. The nature of travel will change. What we noticed in June is there's a sentiment issue in June where instead of people booking 6 weeks in advance or 4 weeks in advance, nobody was booking travel. But what happened is people booked 3 or 4 days or a week in advance. So that's called lead time. And so when a market gets uncertain, people just stop committing to travel far in advance, but they still have travel plans. So because they're nervous, there's more last minute booking activity. So what we even noticed in that market, it almost washed out. There was still a little bit of pullback on revenues, but it washed out because people still traveled just as much. They just weren't willing to commit to their travel plans so confidently. So we're going to see lack of confidence in the market. If the recession hits hard enough, we're going to see a lot more last minute bookings and less, planned bookings in the future. We will see a slight deflation of nightly rate because people are looking to save money. And they're going to be more thrifty. But what'll happen is anybody who's staying for a week or 2 or 3, they're going to always choose an Airbnb instead of a hotel. And so what'll happen is the recession will even drive people from hotel inventory into short-term rental inventory as a way to be thrifty. So we lose some people because they're just not going to travel, but we gain some from the hotel market because people are finally leaving the hotel market to save some money and cook at home instead of eating out all the time. So it's not going to be a total wash, but it's also not going to be like a cratering souffle either, even if it gets really bad.
And Glenn, you let us know if you have any follow-up questions too. And then he also asked, what location do you think, and we can talk location too, because that's a big topic in the Airbnb space. I don't know how much emphasis or value you place on location versus just being really skilled, because I feel like you could do Airbnbs any town in the world. But
Yep.
in what location do you think there'll always be Airbnb properties, and why? Is there like vacation type areas, or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, so there's a macro and a micro answer. What locations should a new person start in right now? I tell all my students, go to the Midwest, right? One of my students drove his ass to, pardon my French, to Tulsa, Oklahoma, because the biggest Airbnb host in Tulsa maybe has 5 properties, right?
Wow.
If he picks up 10 properties in Tulsa, he's the big dog. One of my students last year, a year and a half ago, I told him, go to Birmingham. He went to Birmingham, built a portfolio of 25 doors. And then next year, AirDNA said, these are the top 10 cities to grow in right now. And Birmingham was at the top of the list. So he hit Birmingham right at the right time and started jamming. The Midwest is great because there's not a lot of competition. There's still travel to the Midwest, but there's no competition, which means it's easier for you to be the best at this in the Midwest. But urban markets will always have inventory. So Dallas, Austin, Houston, Fort Worth, Chicago, Nashville, Atlanta, Philadelphia, New York, LA, San Francisco, all the majors will always have travel. Some cities ban this. So I'm giving you names of cities that you might not be able to do Airbnb. And by the way, like Atlanta recently did a ban for people out of state. So you can only Airbnb if you're local. But those cities will always have traffic. And that's why we're heavily urban. All 150 of our properties are either in a downtown area or in a near suburb of a downtown area. And that's our inventory. But Miami, Fort Lauderdale, Tampa, those places crush in high season because people will always travel in high season because there will always be somebody that's not broke, right? There are broke people on the planet right now. And then there's people like your students who have the money to go travel, as somebody's going to book the nice houses in a high season. The low seasons just get lower in the recession, right? So there's more of a race to the bottom on price there. But coastal destinations, there's a lack of real estate in coastal destinations because you can't build on the water per se. So those areas will always be insulated on supply. And then urban markets will typically be insulated on supply because there's always a robust reason for people to travel to a big city. So Dallas, some people travel for tourism a little bit. People just like going to Texas, but there's a lot of family and business and education and work travel and all sorts of stuff in Dallas too. So there's always going to be robust travel to urban markets. And that's why I focus on urban myself. And it's a lot easier to do 1,000 doors in one city if you're in DFW,
And you said something 8-9 months ago, and we have a lot of rentals. I turned one specific rental. It's been getting $1,300 a month for years, steady 1-year lease, 2-year lease. And I said, I got to make this an Airbnb. In the last 7 months, it's averaging $4,500 to $4,700. So it's literally triple my income. Same, nothing changed. You know what I mean? Except just it's Airbnb. And this is high and low months too. So there's been some low months, but the average is still 3 times. So I love that. Now, a lot of people were asking, and for someone like you, I don't think this affects you, but I'm curious your mentality on it. How does someone deal with some cities? Maybe it's mini cities. I'm not sure the logistics, banning Airbnb or hotels fighting them. Obviously, they're in fear because they're taking their market share because they're dinosaurs, a lot of them, and they're not adapting to the new times. And a lot of them have got away with overcharging for so many years and monopolizing the market in a sense. What are your thoughts on cities like banning them and hotels fighting the Airbnb market? Do you have any?
My thoughts on the bans, regulations are good for us. Like, for example, Austin has 3 different permit types. And I don't talk about this in public because if I put it on YouTube, people would start going to Austin way too much because we're still building in Austin. I've got some students trying to grow in Austin. I want to give them.
We won't say nothing.
Yeah, right. So there's type 1, type 2, and type 3 permits, right? People in Austin know about type 1 and type 2, but the type 3 permit's buried way down in the STR language and nobody reads about it. Well, type 3 permit is the non-owner operator short-term rental permits that we use when we do multifamily. And everybody who sends me a DM is like, how are you doing Austin? How are you doing Austin? I can't do it because I can't get a type 1 or a type 2 permit, but nobody ever mentions this type 3 permit that we're getting, right? So regulations raise the bar enough that you have to know what you're doing enough.
I like that. Yeah.
Right. Outright bans are bad, but I still have students in Los Angeles where it's a 30-day minimum. And we do this corporate housing monthly minimum mixed in with peer space, which is a book by the hour for like photo shoots thing. And my students are doing monthly rentals and peer space in between their monthly rentals and running a short-term rental business of the same nature, just doing monthly and peer space instead of 3-night stays. So even where places have a 30-day minimum or have effectively banned short-term rentals, they're still building inventory there. And if LA ever loosens up and says, hey, you guys can start doing short-term rentals, some of my students are going to have a dozen properties that have been monthly and peer space crossovers, and they're just going to put their 12 properties in the short-term rental market as soon as they're allowed to, which is going to be really, really cool. And then I have pricing strategy for markets where you maybe get 90 days of short-term rentals a year. Like you can do 90 days of single night, 2-night, 3 nights. And so we have pricing strategy that picks up a lot of monthly stays. And then we save the 90 days of short-term rentals for in between those monthly stays. So there's a way to manage regulations. There's ways to work around bans outright if you run your properties appropriately. But if the regulations are a good medium, that's a really good thing for people who have business resources, right? As business owners, we can put in the work to get a permit, right? The little guy gets easily discouraged because a lot of people in the Airbnb space, they're looking to get started on their first business. And I don't know if your students ever were the same way, but when I started my first business, I was all nerves. Right. And if any one thing was hard enough, maybe I would have felt defeated enough to give up. Right. I was homeless before I started my first business. So I don't actually think that maybe that was true for me. I would have done anything to get out of being homeless. But I know a lot of people whose lives are too comfortable. So like, oh, no, this is too hard. I'm going to move on. Right. That happens with permits. People give up starting their first business because they reach a brick wall and they just don't think they can get over it and they walk away.
What a different mentality that you have versus 90% of people. And it's people that are softly trying to get into Airbnb as a hobby versus as an actual sustainable business for them and their family. So they're discouraged a little easier. That's definitely true. Yeah. Nate has some great questions. I think we kind of answered some of these, but how do the returns compare to other passive real estate deals like commercial or multifamily? And how do you find deals for doing more passive Airbnb and short-term rentals? And then are there investor groups or syndications available for short-term rentals?
Never call short-term rentals passive ever again. It'll save you so much time and heartache, but they can get that way. It took me 7 years to automate my business. I did it from scratch. I made all the mistakes on the planet, but I retired a year ago and started traveling, but it took me 7 years to do that. There are not syndications yet, and I'm working on one, but I don't think it'd be polite for me to bring it up. And it's not even ready yet. So we can't even talk about that. I'm working on a product that's kind of something that you alluded to, but it's going to take a while for me to actually publicly put it out there. But currently there are no funds that have real estate professionals that also do short-term rentals that you can just throw money at and then they'll give you upsized returns. Nobody's doing it. And the reason why is because the operating side of short-term rentals it's got that business competitive nature. It doesn't have the real estate fundraising kind of thing, right? If we all get into a syndication and buy a multifamily, that's cool, right? We all make a little bit of money. But when it comes to operating short-term rentals, that space is competitive, right? If you owned a restaurant, would you want to give some other restaurant part of your profit just because you're being polite? No, it's hard enough to run a restaurant as it is to shell out some of your profit. So that's why we haven't seen anything like that in the space. That's what I think. So Airbnb will make more money than any passive investment on the planet because it's just not passive. Now, to make it passive, you can hire what's called a co-host, but they take 25% of your top line revenue. So if your property does 10,000 a month, they're going to keep 2,500 top line, and then you get 7,500. So as long as your total operating costs are below 7,500, then you make money, but you're the second to eat. As the owner of the property, you're still second to eat because you want to make it passive. So what we're doing now, we've got 150 arbitrage, but we're now picking up co-hosting properties because it's the easiest thing on the planet. Now that we have operating systems, we're finding homeowners and going, hey, we'll run your property as an Airbnb because we're guaranteed 25% of that money and we have no holding costs. We don't have the rent, we don't have the mortgage, we don't have to pay the electric bill. It's great for the operator. It's a trash deal for the owner, in my opinion, you know? And so if you want to make short-term rentals passive, the best way to do it is to get some properties, hire some housekeepers, hire a manager, and build your own property management unit. And if you do that, you can really make it passive. And I mean, you guys could do that as a collective. Like 20 of your students could probably come together, pick up 400 doors, and then hire a bunch of housekeepers and some management. You guys all have a shared co-op in-house management team. That would be a fast way to do it potentially, but still there has to be a CEO leader to run that whole thing. And that's when everybody else gets to go on vacation.
Amazing. I hope you guys are conceptualizing some of the stuff you're getting from his failures and mistakes and obviously his successes. Another great question by Nate. What would it take to write off $100K in taxable income? How much investment would be required to kind of reduce taxes? What are your thoughts on
you get 100% accelerated depreciation on anything you put in this business.
So really, you buy something for 200, you get 200.
Right off 200.
Huge.
So the tax code, just so you guys, if you guys don't know, right now you can accelerate, depreciate FF&E, furniture, fixtures, and equipment. Furniture is part of the FF&E. So everything that you buy, like that piano, I wrote it off the year I bought that piano. As long as I still own this piano for 4 years, I took accelerated depreciation day one. I just have to own that piano for 4 years. And then I qualify for my accelerated depreciation that I already took. So if you pick up an Airbnb property, buy 100,000 in furniture, you get to write that off, right? You just have to run that. You have to run that thing or move that furniture around for 4 years under your possession. But the IRS tends to not really want it. They don't care where, if your lamp is still around 4 years from now. They're like, there's really small potato stuff here. They bunker up other people's trees, but that's the concept for this. In 2023, we still get accelerated depreciation. Now, all of your rent, all of your wage roll for your housekeeping, everything else is 100% right there, deductible operating costs.
What's the best blueprint for an Airbnb business, like a plan that's not so hands-on? And then what would be a fair breakdown for a property manager? You kind of already hit that. Is it possible to make money with all the overhead?
100%. Right now, our company, our cost for our whole team, Haley's the CEO. Then she's got managers like Kristen, Spencer, Elise, Janet. We've got a bunch of managers under her. And then we've got a housekeeping team and a customer service team, right? Housekeeping team, customer service team, supervisors and managers, and then CEO. That's kind of the network. Now, as you get my size, there's a revenue manager, right? There's a guest experience manager. We got offshoot specialized positions. We also have a launch team because we're launching 100 doors. Somebody's got to launch those bad boys. So, but in stasis, let's say you have 20 doors. You're going to have 5 housekeepers. You're going to have a housekeeping supervisor, but that housekeeping supervisor probably is also going to do customer service because you only have 20 doors. So you can run 20 doors off of 5 housekeepers, 1 manager, and then that manager needs an assistant so they can take a couple nights a week off. And that's all you need for 20 doors.
Wow.
And our operating workload, we pay 8% of revenue is what our cost is to operate, is 8%.
That's insane. So if there was a blueprint for Airbnb that's the most hands off, it's that mixed with longer term, not the short term.
Well, no, if you get good at short term, you can have daily checkouts because that housekeeping team, they just grind. And that supervisor makes sure that the housekeepers have what they need and life is good. So
because you're doing both, but you also have a team where you can go to Burning Man and travel for 2 weeks on end. I remember you got back from traveling for a week and a half and we talked on the phone. You're like, well, I'm leaving again. I'm like, wait, you just traveled. I'm going to more festivals. I'm heading out here. I'm going to take pictures here. I'm like, that's the lifestyle and building $1 million business. That's everyone's dream. And I wanted to bridge the gap of everybody wants an amazing lifestyle. But if you want to put in the actual work and understand the business and really go all in on actually building a sustainable business, which is what you've done. So I love that. Let's do some more questions. Brittany had some great questions too. What are your best practices when approaching owners to sublease? Also what to avoid? And then the next question's not related. So we'll start with that one. There was a lot of people that were asking about sublease.
So don't call it subleasing. Assume that they'll know nothing of what you're talking about. And this might be a little overshare, but our script is based off something I came up with called sales by analogy. So sales by analogy is we start a conversation on a topic that the landlord should feel comfortable because they understand enough about a world. And then the goal is to meet the landlord in person. So our framework is we call a landlord on the phone and we'll say, hey, Mr. Landlord, my name's Sean. I own a corporate housing company. So that's our analogy, corporate housing. I own a corporate housing company. We saw your property on Zillow or we saw your for rent sign in the yard, whatever. Property looks great from the outside. We'd like to come by and take a look at the inside to make sure it works for our use. And we are a business. So I'd like to talk to you for about 10 minutes about our business model and see if there's a good mutual fit here. Can I bring you a coffee tomorrow or Wednesday? Something like that. And we close them on meeting in person. We do it under the flag of corporate housing because corporate housing is more similar to short-term rentals than it is different because corporate housing is a company's going to sign a lease. Somebody else is going to be occupying the place. The company's going to be buying furniture and they're going to make profit off of it, right? And then when we meet the landlord in person, fast forward through a lot of the rapport building, salesy stuff. But when we do our script, the beginning of our script says, yes, so we're a corporate housing company, but we do things slightly differently. And then we pivot from corporate housing into here's what's slightly different than corporate housing. And that's our sales by analogy approach. So that's our best practice for that. That gets the landlord to meet us in person, having a general idea of what's up, and then we take them by the hand and walk them a few steps over to short-term rentals. And the whole time they feel comfortable about the conversation and they feel like they know what's going on. And that's the easiest way to get somebody to stay open-minded and adopt what you have to say. Because if you got on the phone and said, hi, I'd like to Airbnb your property, right? The reason why this doesn't necessarily work is because Airbnb has an infamous reputation, right? There's shootings at house parties in California, stuff like that, right? So what happens in this case, as a corporate housing company, if you meet with a landlord and get 15 minutes of FaceTime, like imagine a landlord talking to any of you for 15 minutes and you sharing anecdotal stories about your real estate portfolio, your experiences, and then you tell them, hey, I really like your property. I'd like to furnish this property and I'd like to manage it myself as a short-term rental. They're going to look at you and go, hey, do I trust you? And the fact that one of the short-term rental platforms is Airbnb, that's just one. You're going to put it on Vrbo, Expedia, Furnish Finder. You're going to have your own website. So you're telling the landlord, I want to take your property and not only Airbnb it, but I want to actually deploy it across a series of channels. And I'm going to, at my discretion, let people stay here based on my business model. That 15 minutes of FaceTime with you is enough to bridge their fear of Airbnb and trust you to make the deal happen. Night and day difference over 15 minutes.
Great answer. And then a lot of people asked about marketing tips, like if we could simplify to standing out on the platform. I've seen some of your videos that are amazing that people just go crazy over. Like I see comments in your free videos, Sean, where they're like, you just made me 5K extra. You just made me 50K last year. You made me $700 more per listing. So I've seen you do this firsthand. What are some of your favorite ways to just make your houses more appealing in a sense on Airbnb?
Yeah. I've got a couple really nerdy videos on this topic, but in short, I want you all to imagine that you're on Airbnb right now. You're shopping, right? Where do you tend to look at right away, right? You're on a map and you see a bunch of listings and you're like, oh, that one looks interesting, right? And then you click on it. And then when you click on it, there's gonna be some text, but you don't really care about the text yet, right? You're like, I wanna see what this place looks like. So you click on the photo reel and you flip through the photos, right? So the most powerful thing that we can do is first make our little icon image and name interesting, and then make our photo reel filled with everything we want them to know. We want to put it in the photos. And so Airbnb's algorithm, they actually internally named their algorithm an interest algorithm, by the way. So that lines up. So you make your little thumbnail, you make the clicks interesting, because the more clicks you get, the more views you get, the more you get ranked on Airbnb. And then you just have to deliver in the photo reel. So we even show a photo of our coffee station. We got like our coffee pot or our Chemex. We got a coffee mug. We have the decaf. We have the coffee. We have the tea. We have everything kind of like put out in front in a pretty way. We take a photo of our coffee station in the photos. That is just as important as a photo of the bedroom itself, because 1 out of 3 travelers prefer decaf or tea as opposed to regular coffee, right? So if you put that in your photos, or if your TV is on and it shows Disney Plus on the TV, a family will notice that you have Disney Plus on the TV for their kids, right? So what we show in the photos is really that kind of night and day difference between what a normal average host doesn't do and what we do.
And there used to be where if the letters, it started with like the A through D on the first page. They stopped that a while back, right? So it's pretty much just whatever has the most interest.
Exactly. Their interest algorithm is looking at a bunch of different metrics. How often you stay full is a big part of that too. So your occupancy percentage and your views are 2 big things. So, I mean, I could go for an hour on that. And I think I probably shouldn't, because I will nerd jack this conversation.
And then any little hacks on names too, like charming little cottage. Is that important?
Here's one thing. Airbnb does not allow you to choose king bed. There's not a checkbox where when you're searching for a place to stay, you can't choose, I want a king bed. There's not a thing for that. But if you write king bed as the first 2 words of your title, now as people are searching, they go, oh, this one's got a king bed, click. That's it. Get a king bed in your place and write king bed at the very first and you're done. That's it.
This is how I know how much. A couple of years ago, I had one of our students reach out to Airbnb owners and tell them they'll redo the pictures and increase their percentage rate of bookings by a certain amount. And he took a percentage. He now makes 6 figures. This was years ago. I know the upside, Sean, because I search for Airbnbs so much. We travel so much. I don't think I've ever gone to the second or third page, first of all. But the second thing is the amount of listings with bad pictures is astronomical. Like they don't know what they're doing. And the pictures, the house could be amazing. It's $1 million home, but the pictures are so bad and so laid out. They're blurry. It's like, they're like throwing money in the garbage. So if you just do this right and learn the game, you're already ahead of most people, sadly.
Well, to your point, this is a peer-to-peer industry, right? Which means anybody can get started, which means your competition, 95% of your competition, they're average Joes. They're not real businesses, right? They're not competitive. Well, maybe 90-ish, maybe just under 90% are that. Only 1 out of 3 Airbnb hosts have more than 2 listings. 1 out of 3. So there's only 33% of the industry that has enough listings to have the data to start to really learn what they're supposed to be doing. So yes, in any other industry, like running a restaurant or retailing something, the work that you have to do to start your business as a restaurant is the work that it takes to become top 1% of this industry, because we're in the peer-to-peer market. The barrier to entry is so low. People make the amount of asinine mistakes that I see from new people in the space. It makes it easy to make content. It makes it like I just grind content all day from the stuff that I see on Facebook and Facebook groups. Sure. It's easy.
So guys, we're going to spend the last couple minutes doing Q&A from you guys too. I have a couple more questions, but think of any other questions you have. We have about 10, 12, 15 more minutes with Sean. I'm going to kind of just nail through these. Do you recommend AirDNA for market research before you buy? A lot of people talk about AirDNA, talk about the inaccuracies.
Well, no. And obviously you may not buy a property too, right? You might do arbitrage. So there's that. The thing about AirDNA or All the Rooms or MashVisor, those are probably the main 3. They aggregate back data, right? They collect all this back data. Now that's cool for catching trends, or you want to see a 4-year chart on a market that you might get into. Those are cool. But when it comes to like doing research to understand what type of property should I do in a city, or should I do this city, should I do this specific neighborhood, there's no better research than you can do than to go find a series of listings that match the kind of property that you think you want to pick up. Like, so let's say in Dallas here, like, you know what, I want to do 4-bedroom houses in the short north area of Dallas. So what do? I go search on Airbnb for 4-bedroom houses in the northern area of Dallas. And then I just go find 10 listings that have tons of reviews that match my criteria. And then I can look at their calendar. I can look at their nightly rate. I can look at their photos, and I can actually get qualitative data on my specific competition and exactly how they're doing. The problem with AirDNA and these other platforms is they take all this wide sweeping data from all hosts, even the bad ones, right? And like we said, 60% of the hosts on the platform shouldn't even be on the platform. So when you look at AirDNA data, it's weighed down with a bunch of inefficient data from people who are making a ton of mistakes. So if you go look at a neighborhood and go, wow, that house is performing and it looks like trash. If you can go find one, like that's my favorite way to do market research. I want to find the worst profitable property. Like I want to find a property that the market shows it's profitable. I want to look at its calendar. I want to look at its occupancy. I want to know that it's making money, but I want to look at that listing and go, bro, you suck at this game. Because the moment I find listings like that suck but are profitable, I know I can go into that neighborhood, do a better job, and just print money. So what I teach my students is go find a competitor that you can beat that is making money, and just go fight with them blow for blow. And that's the best way to do market research, is to do direct comparative analysis of real listings right now compared to some broad sweeping thing like AirDNA.
Great answer. What does work best for automation on the back end managing multiple properties? You kind of already said, is your kind of final answer building a team and paying them obviously like a real business? Yeah,
it's people. You automate with people. You, what would be the word? You exponential growth. Like you leverage technology when you have good people, right? So we have one person who does guest experience, but then we can use software so she can do guest experience for 200 properties, right? We have a couple people who do guest communications and checkouts and check-ins, and they can leverage communication software, but the software really doesn't even matter. A lot of softwares all do the same thing. What a lot of people get wrong is they try to automate before they're good at this, before they understand even what to automate. So they'll pick up a software that does it all, and then it looks like some alchemy. It just looks like some stuff that they can't even understand. So when the software breaks, the host can't fix it, and then they start to lose a lot of money. So the first thing you do is you actually build a little team, and you start to understand what it takes to do good. And then when they start to get too busy, you just buy a software that allows them to 10x their workload. And you just invest in your good people. That's how you automate, is invest in your good people and then give them software when they need software, but it's still them. You're giving them support. You're not automating through software.
And there's some great tools and technology that they've created the last couple of years that you've shared too. I don't know if you use Price Labs or what you use for pricing, but there's a lot of cool things that kind of evaluate the pricing based off the market, based off the time of year, based off the month. That's pretty cool.
I use Wheelhouse. I use Wheelhouse. There's three. There's Price Labs, Beyond Pricing, and Wheelhouse are the main three. But kind of the same way that you reached out to me, Wheelhouse reached out to me and they're like, hey, could you be an advisor for us? Can you like use our software and then call us every month and tell us what we need to change? And I'm actually really excited about Wheelhouse moving forward. They actually built a few pieces of their software into their program that duplicates things that we could only do by hand. And I'm like, we don't like pricing software because no software can do X, Y, or Z. They're like, give us a month. And so they built some really cool features. And now I'm the biggest fanboy. I think they basically tricked me into liking them. They're like, can you be an advisor? What should we build for you to love us? And now I love them. So I use Wheelhouse, but I mean, you have to give them their flowers for that. They went to a portfolio of 100 plus properties and said, hey, what do you need? And they built a product to suit my specific needs. That's how you win customers over. So yeah, I use Wheelhouse for pricing automation, but even with everything that they do, I still have an employee that every morning they go through our prices and make fine adjustments every day.
But even after the technology.
Even after the technology.
That's smart.
So now their job only takes 20 minutes a day, but imagine pricing every day a whole portfolio of 150 doors. It would take 6 hours a day to price to perfection. So now it takes them 20 minutes a day to price to perfection. So it's still going to be by hand a little bit, but now also if somebody forgets to do pricing a few days in a row, your portfolio doesn't souffle, because Wheelhouse will still do 95% of the heavy lifting, but to do perfect price management, you still need a steady hand.
You're also one of the best, so you're going extra mile where most people don't.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we do not settle, right? We're trying to put everybody else out of business, right? We're trying to crush the industry, so we're not settling.
Yep. Pinch has one more question too about criteria or business. Really, do you need a business to rent a spot from a landlord and then do short-term rentals?
Well, if you think about it, is it responsible to rent from a landlord? Then if he decides to change his mind, he threatens to evict you and put an eviction on your personal record. Do you want that guy to have that much leverage over you, right? So doing it through an LLC, just any LLC on the planet, means the landlord is an LLC, you're an LLC, you're going to business together. If the landlord changes his mind and tries to be a douche, he's not going to put an eviction on your specific record. He cannot do that. So it's a means of protection at the lowest level. But this is another thing one of my attorneys in Philadelphia taught me, and this cost me a ton of money, by the way. There's something called course of dealing in the Uniform Commercial Code. So when two LLCs are doing business for a period of time, even if you don't have a written contract, if you can prove course of dealing, you can actually go through on course of dealing as if it was a real contract and defend that in court. So to have two LLCs do business, as long as people are walking in tandem for a period of time, doing business a certain way, you can defend your business through course of dealing in the Uniform Commercial Code.
Someone asked, or Tatum, I've recently implemented the Pro Tools on Airbnb and lowering the rates on days before the bookings. Great results. Any tips that you're not willing to put on your YouTube that you'll share with us?
Well, rule sets are something I don't teach on YouTube. Your prices should be extremely inflated by base price, right? Your base prices should be higher than your competition. And Pro Tools allows you to do what's called a 3-day or 4-day discount. So have your prices be too much for 1 day, but then use the 3-day discount to make yourself competitive at 3 days, right? That's your first step. Now that you're running a pricing strategy that incentivizes 3-day stays, but charges maybe 20% more for a 1-day stay, now you've got a perfect start. But what happens is, let's say tomorrow, the next day, a week from now, you start lowering your prices based on a lead time strategy. Well, you can use a rule set that when you drop your prices, because now you want to make your place cheap, but you don't want that 3-day discount there anymore, or you don't want a 1-week discount, you want to give somebody just a bottom price without discounts, you can use a rule set to take away the 3-day discount or a 7-day discount. So learning to use rule sets is probably one of the most important things that anybody can do for a self-managed revenue strategy. Rule sets allow you to change the amount of a 3-day discount. It allows you to change the price of the listing. You can make it so people cannot check in or check out on a certain day. So we use this for managing housekeeper workflow, like on a holiday. If we have too many checkouts, like Christmas Day, we just take the rest of our portfolio and go no checkouts Christmas Day as a preventative measure. So all of our other bookings go through Christmas Day. Rule sets allow you to do so much. And when you drop your rate to a bottom price for last minute bookings, you also want to remove your other discounts. Just so if you drop your rate from 200 to 100, you don't want to give somebody 50% of 100 by accident. So you want to remove maybe a discount that could do that. And so rule sets, something I don't teach on my YouTube.
Are there tools or anything that you would think about for, I'm thinking of Glenn, for example. He has a nice 5-bedroom house in Indiana that he wants to possibly lease or turn into Airbnb. AirDNA was the one that a lot of people use that you said is not as accurate with present and future data. Is there anything you can share with people on how to kind of figure out if their house, if a market they want to buy or a house they want to buy would be good for Airbnb? Is it just finding one similar on VRBO and all those things? What's the way?
Yeah, so what I would do is I would try to look for a competitor that's making money. If you are in any area that has a population over 5,000 people, maybe over 10,000 people, and you cannot find a property that suits your listing, then just assume, like, because if it's a smaller market, right? If there's a market that's less than 250,000 population, but more than 10,000, like a really small area, if you cannot find a listing that you can start to do comps against, then just assume that you're the first mover, right? And if you're a first mover in this industry, you're going to do fine, right? And so that's kind of, I just default to optimism. If I can't find a 5-bedroom house to do comps on, like for example, down in McAllen, I was doing consulting for a student and we're looking at listings. There was only one 4-bedroom house in all of McAllen that was $500 a night, and their photos were trash. Just like you said, they're just absolutely nasty. The photos were nearly black, how bad the indoor photos were. They had no interior lighting. And they just had like this one little 2-foot wide window for their whole living room. And the photos looked like trash, but it was still booked because it was the only 4-bedroom in the city. Now, if you try to do comps in McAllen, yeah, you're not going to find a listing that you're like, oh, I want to do this slightly nicer house. There's not one there, but I can guarantee you that that property would crush in McAllen because there's just no inventory there. Mm-hmm. So in bigger markets, you will always find competition to like do your comps against. In smaller markets, you might still be the first to market with a big house. And if that's the case, you should do it with full confidence.
Awesome. So and I appreciate your time, Sean. I want to end with someone asked what you would do differently. Like if you were starting out, you made a lot of mistakes. Maybe you made all the mistakes and you wouldn't change anything because it's who you are now. And obviously you built this amazing business and you're just getting started, I think, in your eyes. But is there anything you would do differently starting out?
I would have built faster sooner. Like I did take 2 years where I didn't like actually even focus on it. That was a gaffe. That was really bad. I would also went multi-platform sooner. I would have gotten Verbo faster, direct bookings faster. That's an innovation thing, right? That I could have been more competitive on that. And then I hired a guest experience manager that makes sure that we get good reviews. Once we crossed 100 doors, we should have had somebody in that position earlier, right? And we went through kind of this phase during COVID where a lot of people were mad at us. And we got a run of bad reviews only because we're so operations heavy and so stressed out from COVID that we didn't care. Like okay, guest, you can leave, whatever, so Haley got burned out. And so as a measure to prevent Haley from burning out, a guest experience manager would have been better sooner. So our growing pains are realizing, hey, there's a position that would have been good. We should have hired that earlier. So a lot of the ideas that I've had, I wish I just had those ideas earlier.
The odds of people making millions of dollars on the platform is 100%. And the odds of people struggling and giving up are 100%. I want our inner circle and our group to be the ones making the millions, building a passive income, not fully passive, but building a business that they're proud of that can allow them to travel. That's what I want. And that's what they want. What are some checklists or some mentality shifts to maybe think about before heading out?
I remember I did a video that said the 7 parts of an Airbnb business. One thing a lot of people get, and there's actually a book for this called The Leadership Pipeline by Ram Charan. Great book. A lot of people, as they grow, they keep an internal bias based on their skill sets, right? Some of you guys are better salespeople. Some of you guys are better with numbers. Some of you are creatives and probably do really great design. And you're going to carry your superpower into your business into scale. There's going to be a point, though, where your company will need something that you're not good at, and you have to shed your ego and stop trying to solve all of your problems with your one superpower. That phrase, if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? Oh, we've got revenue problems. Well, we just need to sell more is probably what I would say. But if we had revenue problems, some other guys would be like, well, our budgets are whack. We need better accounting controls, right? The response to the problem is going to be based on internal biases. So you need to recognize that there's 7 solid parts of this industry and that you need to grow into balance of all 7 to respect all 7. Just be prepared that you're not going to be enough after 25 doors. You'll want somebody else who thinks differently than you, has a different skill set than you, and you want to respect that like Haley and I couldn't be more different. Like Haley and I could not be more different.
And she's the one running almost everything, right?
She's running almost everything. She's an operations person, and I'm like the color by numbers, work fast guy. I'm like, let's just rip it. And she's like, no, let's just not rip it. I'm like, let's rip it. And she's like, no, let's do it safe. I'm like, no, let's like ride the lightning. So we're completely opposite.
That's huge, man. Well, I really appreciate your time, and thank you so much. You're such a giver. Yes, you have a lot of knowledge and wisdom, but I can tell you genuinely like helping people and answering questions and giving value. You do a lot of Q&As with some of your group, and I'm excited to connect and actually meet you in a couple of weeks. And I think you sparked a lot of people's Airbnb bug in a sense, because a lot of them have already wanted to build a business. Now they have a little more insight, a little more knowledge on the foundation. So I appreciate you, man. Thank you so much for who you are and what you've built. And I'm excited to continue to build with you.